Um, Thanks very much for joining us, and on this bit dull and wet morning. Hopefully, it's not going to get too cold for many of us. Um, yeah, today's discussion and briefing is going to be about the Nematodirus forecast, which SCOPS has on its webpage, and why we do it, and a little bit about Nematodirus, which is, of course, a nasty disease, which causes high numbers of mortalities if we get treatments and everything wrong. So it's very important to keep an eye on it and understand the parasite and how it's developing through the spring with the weather conditions. So I'm not going to chat too long. I'm just going to pass you over and introduce the two people that are speaking today. We've got Lesley Stubbings and we've got Dave Bartley from Moredun. So I'm going to hand over to Dave first, I think, who's going to say a little bit about the disease and why we need the forecast. And then we can have a chance for questions after Dave's spoken, and then we'll have Lesley after that, and just generally have a general chat about Nematodirus at the end. I think there are some non-press people here as well. If we try and get the press questions in at the end first, and then if anyone else wants a general discussion about it, then we're more than happy to. So I'll hand over to you, Dave.
Right. Cheers, Kevin. So I was asked, or I wanted to really talk about why do we need a forecast, and particularly why do we need a forecast for Nematodirus. When I was thinking about it, I was thinking, well, Nematodirus, it's a predictably unpredictable parasite. And what I mean by that is we actually know lots about it. We know that it's very different from lots of the other strong gall parasites. It historically, eggs laid down 1 year, take a year to sort of develop. And we know that they can synchronize hatch when the sort of climatic conditions are right. So we know that it's a sort of as the model and the sort of forecast is, it's sort of 10 degrees for 10 days, and we know that can lead to a synchronized hatch. The thing for it is the sort of unpredictability is that we don't know year to year when that's going to happen. We don't know if that's going to happen in north, south, east, west facing fields. So the forecast is there to help sort of make the sort of parasite slightly more predictable. And I think that is important. As Kevin says, it can cause huge amounts of mortality and morbidity. And actually, it can cause it very quickly. If the sort of synchronized hatch occurs at the same time that you have lambs grazing, you can see huge numbers of mortality in those lambs. And actually, if we see lots of the sort of disease in sheep, you get that hunched up, dehydrated look, and if we see sort of clinical signs, you tend not to see that compensatory growth in them. So we know that if they get hit really early on, then actually we need to be able to get on top of that. We often recommend that egg counts are used to do it, and of course they have a place for other strong galls, but actually egg counts aren't always very reliable for looking at Nematodirus, because a lot of the damage can occur well before the actual eggs are out on pasture. So again, this is where the sort of forecast helps, in that it can give you an idea of when to sort of administer treatments to, or consider certainly that when the sort of high risk periods are. And I know Lesley's going to show you the map, and I think it's a really good sort of aid to both I think about when it's Nematodirus is an issue, but also to sort of highlight the whole thought of Nematodirus as an issue. So again, it's good for farmers to use, but again, it's also good for vets and vet practices to use to get into that whole discussion about Nematodirus. I said it's predictably unpredictable, and that is true, and I think that's the case. But what we are starting also to see is that we're starting to see a difference in the the parasite, in the way that it is developed, you know. So the historical part was that we would see that springtime rise, and that still is the predominant time where we see a disease. But what we have seen, and this is, I think, partially down to the parasite themselves, that it's quite a plastic parasite. And what I mean from that is it's quite adaptable to change. And we're starting to see another peak occurring in the autumn time. And again, you know, that was identified even when it was sort of first discussed and characterized in the sort of 30s and 40s, that this was about, but it was kind of considered not a very important part of it. And I think it's still a less of an important one, but again, it is something to do it. So, you know, I think when we're using the forecast, I think it provides peace of mind for certain that we're in the right ballpark for treating. It allows us to sort of target treatments better and to help in that decision making. But I think the other thing is that actually it also helps farmers identify where risk might occur. As I said earlier, if we're thinking about nematodirus being laid down by lambs in one year and being a risk for subsequent years, the sort of forecast can also help identify where those risk places may be, you know. So, and it may be that you can plot, and certainly you can look at it over year on year, when it has been a problem, and you can then use that to identify where eggs may have been put down and where the risk paddocks might be for the following year, and also to allow you to think, well, actually, do I need to think about cleaning those paddocks up, either by, you know, reseeding or using barren animals to clean them up later in the season. Again, they won't work wholly, but they can help in this. So yeah, I think there's lots of good reasons for why we need the forecast. And yeah, and it allows you to cover some of those changing patterns of disease. Yeah, I think that probably is as good a good point to pass over to Lesley. You know, I can talk about nematodirus for ages and ages, but I won't. But I will happy to answer questions if people have specific ones about the disease.
Thanks, Dave. Has anybody got any specific questions at this point? Or are we going to save them up for the end? Just to either unmute yourself and ask it, or stick it in the chat box or whatever, and we'll do this as we go along. Now, I should also say before I start that we have got lined up for you, and Joe will put them up at the end. We've got some really good contacts for press to follow up. Vets and SQPs who have agreed that, you know, if you want to follow up, they've got, you know, how they use the forecast, how they do that with their clients, and some more case study type stuff. So we've got that lined up for you, and Joe's got that already. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to take us straight live to the SCOPS website. She says, hopefully. I might just actually for some reason it's not behaving itself, that one. I'll go to this one. Right, come back, share my screen. That's more like it. Right, okay, it'll just take a second or two to load up. Joe, can somebody give me a thumbs up when it's there? Everybody see that now? Okay, that's brilliant. So I'm just going to walk us through now what the forecast does, and there's quite a lot in behind that. Now, the thing about nematodirus is that nematodirus hatching in the spring is temperature dependent. So the forecast is using weather data from 140 different weather stations across the UK to track what the temperatures are doing. And in the past, the research has been done. I'm sure Dave will have a lot more background if anybody wants to go into it, but we've looked at soil temperatures, air temperatures. These are obviously measuring air temperatures, and that seems to be the most reliable. We have looked at soil as well. So basically we're looking at, Dave, give me a thumbs up, 10 degrees is the sort of the threshold that we're looking for. And that's what these coloured dots are trying to do. So I'm on the front page now. I'm just going to click through now to the actual forecast page. It's updated every day, and we now have a website which is is compatible with smartphones and so on. So what a lot of people are doing now is they are just having a shortcut on their phones now, so they look at it every day, and hopefully if you follow the contacts up, you will find people who are doing just that. And at peak, in terms of use of this forecast, last year, again, Joe could put me right, but we were looking at nearly 5,000 hits a day on the website when we were at peak time for nematodirus. I don't know, Joe, whether you want to just say anything at that point, because that's obviously your baby, or Nicola.
I haven't got those figures to hand, sorry, Lesley, but I can share them afterwards. I can send them out.
Okay, all right. It was certainly upwards of 4,000 from memory. So we are getting a lot of use of this forecast. So what is it actually doing then? Okay, we've got these 140 weather stations around and about the place. Arguably, people have to find the one nearest to them. But as I'll say in a few minutes, that might not necessarily be the most appropriate one for them. They have to think about this. And they have to look at this in combination with other things. But if I can just zoom up a little bit and hopefully pick the one nearest to me, which I think is that one. It's Marham anyway, but that doesn't matter. So when they click on one of those dots, what they get there is where it is, how high above sea level. The ASL is meters above sea level, obviously. And at the moment, that one is showing moderate risk. And what it's saying is that in a week to 2 weeks, if the weather continues to warm, which clearly this year is not a given because we're in a cold snap, we'll come back to that. But at the moment, it's a moderate risk, but you should be thinking in a week or 10 days, 14 days time, if you've got lambs in the risk categories, which we'll come on to, you should be thinking about treating. Now, this is really important because, you know, from SCOPS principles, obviously our principles are that we want to use as much anthelmintic wormer as necessary, but as little as possible. And one of the problems with the nematodirus is that if you talk to a lot of farmers historically, what they've done is, well, I lamb at X time, my lambs are going to be 5 or 6 weeks old or whatever age they go at here, and therefore every year I'm going to drench my lambs at that point. And as you'll see when I show you the historical data, 1 year in 5, that might be right, but by using the forecast, they can get a lot more accurate. That means A, they're more accurate in terms of treating the lambs, getting a better response and safeguarding the health and welfare of the lambs. But B, from a sustainability point of view, of course, they're not having to go in and retreat for a second time, or maybe even a third time in some cases, if they get the timing wrong. So as I say, these are updated every day, and our historical data is weekly. I'll show you that in a minute. But you'll see there underneath that, it's important, and we do point out to people that, you know, things will vary from farm to farm and field to field. And as Dave alluded to, south-facing fields as opposed to north-facing fields are quite different. I did a little bit of work with some temperature monitors back in the first COVID lockdown. It kept me amused when we couldn't do anything else. We got little data loggers, and the difference between reaching 10 degrees on the south-facing field as opposed to the north-facing field was a fortnight in the case of the 2 fields that I did. And I know our chairman, Kevin, I've just asked him at the weekend, he's going to be doing a little bit more of that work for us over the next 12 months. So that matters, and people need to take that into account. And they also need to take into account how much higher above sea level they are compared to the weather station they're looking at. So here we've got Marham at just 21 meters above sea level. For every 100 meters, we're suggesting that, as a rule of thumb, it will delay hatching by 7 days. So if it's 200 metres, it would be 14 days, and so on. And you'll see that come through when you look at the actual data that we get from the historical stuff. So that's what happens underneath those buttons, okay? And people will find their own. Has anybody got any questions at that point before I move on a little bit? I'm quite happy to take questions if anybody's got them. Nope. Okay, we'll carry on then. So the next thing I wanted to do, I'll come back to the risk for individual lambs. I'll come back to that. But I want to now just take you to the historical data. And we've got historical data now for every week the forecast is live, going back to 2019. But I'll just take you into this year's to start with as she loads. Okay. Right, so what we have here is at the top, obviously, the weeks. So this is the week, and then we've got all of the weather stations. And I'm going to take you right down to the bottom to start with, to Yeovilton, because Yeovilton is one of the dots that's black at the moment. I think we've got 2 black dots at the moment on the forecast. And what we're looking for when we're looking at this is, the farmers want to know when they reached certain points. If they've not been looking at the forecast and they might have just started looking at it, if you're down in Yeovilton, you might want to know that, you know, you've actually been in that high risk period for 3 weeks now, and very high risk for 2 weeks. So actually, down there, if that is actually appropriate to you, it may all be just about over by the shouting. You know, there's been quite a hatch. And what we're really trying to guard against here is that Nematodirus in a situation, let's go up to one of the other ones that I was just, so let's go here, let's go and look at Hurstman. So there, where's my mouse gone? There we are, Hurstman. So now that's been orange for a long while. So that's, you know, there'll be a little bit of a trickle hatch there going on. It's a moderate risk. Well, what we're really trying to avoid is a situation, for example, here, where it's relatively low risk and we get a very sudden warming, and it's that mass hatch of Nematodirus that's going to cause really serious disease. So what this data is doing, it's allowing the farmer to look at what's happening in their area, whether or not they've suddenly gone to a high risk, whether or not they're coming down the other side. You can see here the Isle of Portland was at very high risk right at the beginning when we first started running her at the beginning of January, and now it's gone back to a very low risk. You know, and that's something that those farmers need to know, because they could well have had quite a hatch earlier on when there were no lambs about. They still need to keep an eye on it, but it's worth knowing that there has been an opportunity for the Nematodirus to hatch. So, okay, if we just look at some of the other ones, obviously, if you go to somewhere, I know because I've been looking at these, and Reedsdale Camp, for example, here you are, Reedsdale Camp is at over 200 metres above sea level, and it's still at very low risk, nothing very much happening there. But those are the ones that probably we need to keep an even better eye on, because if the weather suddenly does warm up in April, they could well get a mass hatch. And if there are lambs at the right age, that could be a problem. So the historical stuff is really important to us. Now, if I can just go back again to, let's go back to the bottom again, to Yeovilton and Wittering. There's the one that's nearest me at the moment, Wittering. So I've got a lot of people lambing at the moment. We're in an orange period. A lot of lambs, probably got about one farm with about 7,000 on the ground, or will have by the end of next week. And they are going to be in the firing line as far as age and so on is concerned in another month's time. I'm going to be keeping a very, very careful eye on that, because if that temperature does go up, having had a cold spell now, then I know I need to be on the phone and saying, oh, hang on, we need to be thinking about getting out there and doing something. Now, if I go back and just put last year's data up for those, you can see the difference. And this is where the forecast really starts to come into its own. All right. It's all right. The thumbnail pictures down the side are on my bar. Okay, so now you get an idea of what a full season looks like. And you can see here, Yeovilton last year, whereas this year we're still in this bit here, has already reached red and black. Last year it was much later. Wittering was quite the opposite in terms of, sorry, very much similar as this year, but there we are with the risk period for Wittering. But as you go through, if you go and have a look at this afterwards, you can just access this data on there. You can see that where the high risk periods are does shift around a lot for individual weather stations, and across the country you get some idea there of how much variation there is. So this idea that farmers are going to go in and treat lambs at the same time every year, you can get what I was saying earlier on, that you might get it right 1 year in 5, but just get some idea. And I'll just very quickly put you the previous years up just to prove that they are all different, and you've got another 2 years to go at. Need to we'll nip down the bottom again, and there we are again with Yeovilton, a similar position to the year before, but Wittering was later than it was. So, we haven't got it for 2018. Unfortunately, we didn't start doing this until 19, did we, Joe? But with the Beast from the East year, obviously we had a lot of problems because we had a very, very cold March and start to April, and then it did warm up so that it was a sudden, and we got a mass hatch, and that's what the lambs were walking into. Okay. Right, so let's go back just to our little bit about the lambs. So once they've seen this, they've decided which weather station is more suitable for them. And one thing we were talking about earlier on was the Yeovilton one. You can see that on that map now, that black one down here, there's Yeovilton. I think this one here is actually Exeter. Let me ping that back. There we go. No, it's not. It's North Wyke. Is that one Exeter? Exeter Airport. Okay, that's still only 27 metres above sea level, but you can see that one's a more moderate risk, and it may well be that farmers down there, some of them would be better looking at Exeter than at Yeovilton. They have to just weigh up which of them is most suitable in terms of their actual forecast. So once they've done that and they decided where they are, and they think, right, okay, I think I'm now in a risk period, or I will be in a risk period in the next 7 to 14 days, what they then need to do is actually to do a risk assessment as far as the animals themselves are concerned. Well, what we have to remember with nematodirus is that lambs do develop, acquire immunity to nematodirus relatively quickly compared to other roundworms. Other roundworms, we would expect them to be, we wouldn't normally see any response in terms of immunity. And again, Dave is the person to put more detail on this. I think the first papers would be somewhere between 4 and 5 months. You can see some response, but it's much older than that before we get a really good level of immunity. With nematodirus, you're talking a matter of just weeks, but that relies on them coming across nematodirus in relatively low levels, so this nice little trickle hatch, so the immune system gets worked up, responds, and we get an acquired immunity. Where we're in trouble is where they haven't had chance to have that little trickle. All of a sudden there's a mass hatch and bang, it goes together. And if it goes with coccidiosis as well, where we've got really bad weather conditions, that's when we're likely to get a very high level of mortality as well as morbidity. So the main risk factors here are they old enough to be eating significant amounts of grass? Now, obviously, they've got to be eating grass to be able to ingest the nematodirus larvae. And the other issue with nematodirus is that it is the immature larvae that cause the problems. So as Dave was saying, we can't wait for fecal egg counts to tell us we need to worm them, because by then, if they've ingested masses of immature larvae, there will already been a big problem. But they've got to be eating grass. And, I think a lot of people forget, particularly perhaps if ewes aren't in that good a condition and the milk isn't that good, you do find that pushes lambs to graze even earlier. So people need to be aware of that. But 6 to 12 weeks of age would be the window of where they're most vulnerable. That's where we would say they're most vulnerable. Probably by 12 weeks, less so, but it does depend on whether or not they've been exposed. Have you got groups where there's likely to be a challenge from coccidiosis? The two things together are a bit of a perfect storm in terms of how they hit lambs. Has there been a sudden change from a cold snap to hot, as what we've been talking about and looking at that data? And have you got lambs that are under other stresses? And the other thing that's on the next one really is, are they on pasture that actually carried lambs last spring? Because as Dave said, there's the life cycle. The life cycle does take 12 months. So the larvae they're coming across this year are hatching from eggs that were dropped last year. So very high risk pastures are going to be those where there were lambs last year. And if they were doing some fecal egg counts and they log that, then they should be able to actually note to self, this is going to be a high risk pasture in the following season. So that's where egg counts can be really useful. So those are the risk factors really that they need to go. They're under other stresses. Triplets obviously fostered, young or to older ewes that are struggling. Those are the sorts of risk factors that we want them to actually consider before they then go in and treat. And the recommended treatment is still a 1BZ. Dave, I'm sure will fill you in on the work that Moredun have done on resistance in nematodirus. That it's not there, but it's not a major issue. And so what happens is if we use a white drench, A, it's kind to young lambs, but B, it is taking the pressure off the other groups when we need them later on. The only word of warning I would say there, and I have to do this with my clients, is that if we do get a late nematodirus challenge, then what can happen is that you're also running that concurrently with the other roundworms starting to wake up. And it's at that point that I have to probably skip the white drench if we get a late challenge on farms where we know we've got resistance in the other roundworms to a white drench. So there is just again a timing issue there. We wouldn't go in with 1BZ blindly in every circumstance. We just have to be a little bit circumspect about it. Okay, I think I've covered that. I'm very happy to go back to it. Perhaps I'll just leave it up for a second or two if anybody wants to go back to any points on the forecast. It will stay up. It's been live now for just over a week. No, how long have we had a live now, Joe? About 3 weeks, haven't we?
And it's been running in the background since middle of January, just to make sure that it's all working correctly. It's been live for 10 days now. Yeah.
Okay. We didn't put it up too soon because it wasn't going to be a very early year. Now, obviously, in Scotland, the further north you get, the less interested people will be in this at this stage. It's later on for them, but we do run it through usually into July. And one of the things that we're talking about this year, and Dave and I were talking about this just earlier on, and we will review, is whether or not, given the circumstances he was saying about, we do see a bit more nematodirus in the autumn now, we might be thinking about doing something in the autumn in the future, but it's always under review. And clearly, this is the nematodirus forecast. There's a lot of work going on at the moment in terms of improving liver fluke forecasts, and also quite a lot of work going on with Dave's colleagues around and about in terms of other roundworms, for example, Telodosagea. So it's somewhere that we hope to go with more support like this on other types of parasite in the future.
Thank you, Lesley. And it's also, the farmer has a responsibility too, don't they, to understand their animals and when they are going to be at risk. Are the lambs old enough to be grazing, even though there's a hatch, and just knowing their land. I mean, we've got land from 750 down to 20 foot and north facing and south facing, so it's quite tricky to manage sometimes, but I think the farmer really has to have a finger on the pulse of their own business as well and use the forecast to help them make their decisions. I dropped out there for a minute, my internet, but did you mention egg counts and why we can't really rely on egg counts at the start when there is an initial hatch?
Briefly, but Dave, do you want to take that back up again just to reinforce that one?
Yep, absolutely. The reason that we don't use, or we don't suggest egg counts are a good tool for this is that, and as Lesley sort of alluded to, the damage is really caused by the immature stages burrowing into the small intestines and damaging the small intestines. So basically, by the time it normally takes somewhere between about 14 days for a larvae to get in to become an adult. There's 14 to 16 days, and the damage is done before. So basically, they won't lay eggs until after that period of time. But if the damage is done in the first week, then actually you've got a week worth of damage before you even see an egg count. And what happens is you don't see, that damage occurs, and you can see death and clinical signs well before an egg count comes out. So it's the one time where we don't suggest egg counts are the tool of choice.
And the dangers of going in too early?
Just overuse of the products, really. It's really, if you go in, it's not with a white drench. You're just wasting that time and energy to doing it. But that said, if you have huge problems, and the forecast suggests that is something that needs to do, then you could argue that it's the one time where we might suggest that drugs, it's better to use those white drenches earlier than leaving until later.
The other danger is obviously you go in too early and then hatch just afterwards, and
yeah, you have to go back again. Yeah. I mean, again, people have to remember that these products, that the white drenches, there's no persistence. What you kill on the day is what you kill on the day. And if they then go out 2 days later and pick up a good slug of larvae, then what you did them with is not going to do them any good. So, it is really important to try and time it as best you can.
have we got any questions? I'm afraid I'm on the phone, so I'm struggling to see the chat. I don't know if Joe's more on the phone.
Nothing on the chat at the moment, Kevin.
Okay. Is there anything else you need to cover between you? Do you think that we missed? You've touched on products, really, haven't you? And the right product.
Yeah.
So. I think if there's no more,
I've got sorry, Kevin. I've got the contacts. So if people want to follow up with us any case studies, we've got half a dozen folks who are willing to. So this is a mix of vets and SQPs who are using the forecast on a regular basis, and they're more than happy for journalists to contact them if they want any follow-up case study information. So there's a list there. So if anybody wants contact details for those individuals to do a case study on, then just drop me an email and I'll fix you up a matchmaking service.
Great names on that as well.
Yeah, I think talking to people who are actually using it and how they're using it and how useful it is to them would be hopefully of interest.
But yeah, we just can't encourage people enough keeping an eye on that forecast. I know I will be, and it doesn't take long just to have a quick look. And it's also interesting to see how it changes around the whole country as well. Up north, they're not thinking about the Nematodirus as early as we are down in the south most of the time due to the weather. But I don't think it's going to get much warmer this week up there either, is it?
No, it's not. Yeah, but the danger is then that we have it does warm up quickly. That's as we were saying, that's what will encourage this mass hatch. And very often it's it's sort of middle born lambs and later born lambs are the ones that actually suffer the most because they're going right into the firing line, whereas some of the earlier born lambs, it's all, you know, they're up and they've got an immunity and they just walk through it. But the immunity is really important, because that's where we see problems in the autumn, isn't it, Dave? Is where lambs have remained relative naive for whatever reason, and then there's a hatch in the autumn, and you know, people get really surprised that we're seeing nematodirus in the autumn. But that's why the lambs are succumbing, because they haven't got that immunity built up.
Neris was asking about reporting of incidents, so we have changed that slightly this year.
Yeah, do you want me to take that one, Lesley, in terms of people being able to report cases onto the website? So in previous years, we have had the functionality that if people were having an outbreak before their dot changed colour on the map, they could report it in. We've slightly changed that, so that needs to now come from a vet, an SQP or a laboratory. So we know that it's a confirmed nematodirus outbreak with lab testing, because previously we were getting a lot of anecdotal reports which were clouding the picture somewhat. So the functionality is still there, but it is specifically for vets, SQPs and advisors, rather than for farmers, which is just an email functionality. On the website, there's the three options. There's the map, there's the historical data, and there's the confirmed cases. It's on the confirmed cases tab that reporting function is on there.
Yeah, sorry, Joe, I should have gone to that as well. But yeah, so APHA and SRUC and people will give us updates, so we can
can
put that on there as well.
And whenever that bit's updated, we share that on social media. So that's an easy-ish way to track what's going on.
Do you think farmers should wait until they see any clinical signs of nematodirus as well, or do you think?
By the time you get to that stage, you're in trouble usually. I mean, very often with coccidiosis, we try to get to the cusp of it, but with nematodirus, you can be in big trouble before. You don't tend to dribble into it when you've got a real problem, do you, Dave?
Absolutely not.
And once you start seeing the real signs of it, there's a lot of damage being done, isn't there?
Yeah, you're probably too late by that point.
Yeah,
it is a tricky one. It is. There's a lot to weigh up, and I think hopefully people appreciate the forecast is one part of trying to make it more accurate for people to weigh it up, but they've still got quite a lot to think about.
Yeah. No, that's why, as I said at the beginning, it's a very interesting disease and difficult to manage. But hopefully, you've shone some light on it, and hopefully, this will help farmers more. Another tool for them to understand it. And there's some great also on the website in the technical manual. There's some really good information about nematodirus if people want to just have a look through that in their own time as well. But thank you for joining us today. If there's nothing else, Lesley?
Can I just say as well that on our website as well, if people go to it, we do hold the technical information for the England pathway worming treatment check. So that is actually on our website. There's a tile there and you can go in there and it's the guide and everything, and we will be adding a lot more stuff. So just to flag that up as well, that the SCOPS website is where you will click through to from the DEFRA website, but you can go direct to it as well.
Yeah, and that's roundworms and everything later on in the season. Okay, well, thank you all for joining us, and I'm sure if you've got any more questions, Lesley or Dave or Joe can help you with those. And please make use of those contacts that Joe put up. There's some really good names on there, so they can give you quality information. But thank you all for joining us, and we'll call this one to a close for now. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Em.
Thanks, bye.